Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of 100 Words or Less, the podcast. I am your host, Ray Harkins, sitting here today. New microphone and all. It's exciting. Anyways, we're episode number 49. I know I always make a big deal out of the episodes because I'm like so close to having a full year of episodes. Once I hit 52, it's going to be a big fucking deal. Not really, but I'll be excited. Anyways, our guest this week is Jon Contino from CXXVI Clothing. He's also an amazing graphic designer, and once you visit his site, you'll be like, oh, I've seen that. Oh, I've seen that too. Holy shit, I've seen that as well. More on him in a minute. propertyofzach.com. Go visit there. You'll be able to find the latest and most awesome new shit that's out there, from new bands, new interviews, interesting perspectives on musical culture. Just do it. I love the site. We love our partnership. Boom. A few other items of business to get out of the way. Review the show. Go to iTunes. And I want to mention someone specifically because, like me, living in the United States of America, I'm not able to see if someone from a different country leaves some nice comment on iTunes because you have to switch stores and all this other shit. But I found a program that enables me to see that stuff. And there's a person from the UK. His username is Lickety Splat, which is creative, but he just left the nicest thing, and I just really appreciate that. It was basically everything he said was exactly what I want people to get out of the show, which is just, it fills your soul up. I read it, and it was like, yes, he gets it. That's fucking awesome. So yeah, go to iTunes, drop some stars on there. It'll take you like 2 seconds. You don't have to write nice sentences if you don't want to. That's fine. I get it. We're all really busy. I've left like 10 reviews on iTunes my whole life, so I get it. But if you do it, it just makes the show look that much cooler, and ultimately, that's what will help me continue to make the show, as long as it looks cool. Because the second it doesn't look cool, I'm fucking out of here. Not really, but. And then one other little thing. I told you, if you've listened to the past few episodes, I've told you that I'll be rating you. It'll probably only be for one other episode, but there's a website called the avclub.com. Great website. You can visit there, see what's up with it. But they do a weekly column on podcasts, and part of it, they do a little new to us section where basically they highlight a podcast they don't regularly review, and I don't expect to get regularly reviewed on this site because they review like all of the most gigantic, famous podcasts out there. But I would love it if we were able to sneak into that. So what I need you, the listener, to do is email them, podmass@avclub.com. I think, 10, 12 of you do this, it will be awesome because they'll start to say, oh, hey, a few people have been hitting us up about this show. So please do that. I will really appreciate it because for whatever reason, I'm fixated on that currently. So yeah, that's it. Jon Contino. I didn't know him at all. This conversation was the first conversation I've ever had with him. I've only interacted with him by viewing his website, looking at his design work, and being like, man, it's fucking awesome. I got first tipped to him by a gentleman named Busky. He used to play bass in a band called Terror, and I've always loved his artwork. And I think he posted something on his blog that basically said, hey, here's some artists that I personally love, and that's how I found out about Jon. And I had no idea that he was really sort of an independent music / hardcore kid. And then you'll come to hear in our conversation where we just, it's totally late 90s metalcore talk. And I apologize for those of you who don't give two shits about that. That's totally fine. But the lessons that he does lay out in this show are great. Basically, anybody that works in a creative field, you will totally love what Jon has to say, the advice he has to give, and it's just really cool because you can do it on your own. Fuck what anybody else says. You can do it on your own. Pick it up, learn it. If there's something that you're curious about, figure it out yourself. That's how anybody who that's involved in the DIY independent culture, that's what you do. You're like, oh, I want to learn about this, so I'm just going to do it. I'm going to suck at it for a long time, but then all of a sudden I'll get it, and I'll be somewhat proficient or maybe even awesome at it. So yeah, we talk about hustle and how much work that actually takes to learn shit. Like I said, a lot of late 90s metalcore talk, and then growing up with responsibility. Just kind of having adulthood thrust upon you for various reasons. And also, a big congratulations to him because he just had a kid like weeks ago. We did this interview, and you'll probably, I think that we mentioned it at some point, where we talk about, having a kid. He's like now a father, and like baby's like maybe a month old. So congratulations to Jon. Here's my conversation with him, and enjoy.
Yeah, because usually I start these things off with just like how I personally kind of found out about, your creative output, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Was I don't know if you know that dude Busky. Let's see. I don't think you do. He's just trying to think. He used to play in Terror. He was the bassist in Terror.
Oh yeah, okay, sure.
Yeah. Like he's a fellow designer, and I think he works at that merch company Bravado or something in New York.
Oh, holy shit! I follow that guy on like Instagram or Tumblr or something, and I couldn't place where I knew him from, but he was like all his posts and stuff reference all these old hardcore bands that I knew from when I was younger.
Yeah. No, for sure. And like I can't remember because I used to work at Century Media, the label that Terror was on for a bit.
Yeah, sure.
So I got to know him pretty well and was like always loved his art or whatever. Anyway, so he did a post one day. I was like, oh, here's artists that I'm like super into currently. And he posted you. And then it's one of those things. I love when I like kind of open a door and I'm like, holy shit, there's this amazing world I wasn't aware of before.
Yeah.
And then it was even funnier where obviously I know you are a user of the music streaming service Rdio.
Mm-hmm.
And it was super random because then I was just like rifling through playlists. Like this was months ago. I subscribed to the playlist you put together of like, late 90s, early 2000s, like metalcore.
Nice.
It was so funny because then like I had no connection to you. I was just like, oh, this is a fucking good playlist. And then literally like 2 days ago, I was like, oh shit, that's Jon. Like that's Jon. Anyways, the moral of my story is the fact that like if you've been involved in like punk or hardcore or whatever, you were like a half a person removed from everybody. Like,
absolutely.
And do you find that still to this day where it's just like people you start to work with that do random like freelance jobs or whatever, like once you kind of find out you're part of the club, it's like, oh, you were that dude, or were going to shows the same time I was.
It's such a sick thing. I mean, here's an example for you. Last night I was just kind of messing around, like waiting to, hopefully, be called upstairs because my wife was going into labor. So I was just totally killing time,
Right.
So I opened up a SoundCloud account and just started uploading all these demos from like back in the day. And one of the bands was called Maybe Tomorrow that used to play. They were from like Eastern Long Island.
Uh-huh.
And when I did my Apple event in Soho a couple of weeks ago, the guy who runs all the Apple events in that store was like the singer or the guitarist of that band. And we were just sitting there, and he's like, yeah. He was like, I was actually at one of your band's shows when we decided that we were going to make a band. And I was like, oh my God, that's so weird.
Right. It makes me happy though, because obviously it's like, we've all been drawn to this community, and like, people obviously do a million different things with their lives, but it's like you somehow like you always get kind of pulled back in to where it's like, oh yeah, like, especially if you're into the creative field, it's like,
right.
You just always find people where it's like, oh, cool, you've been able to make a living doing this, and like you still kind of, go to shows, you still kind of care about it, and
right.
It's totally awesome. So, without getting too far ahead, so I presume, with obviously how your accent portrays yourself, you were born and raised in the New York, Long Island area.
Yeah. Everywhere, yeah. I mean, my family's like the typical kind of like Italian immigrant kind of story, came over here in the early 1900s and then kind of spread out from the Lower East Side into Brooklyn and Queens and Long Island, Staten Island, the Bronx, that whole kind of thing,
Right. So did they have some amazing immigration stories?
No, my great grandparents, I knew them,
uh-huh.
But I was too young to really kind of soak up any of that stuff.
Yeah.
So I kind of miss it. All the stories that I get now are from like my grandfather, from like all this, my grandfather, my uncles and stuff, all the stuff they used to do like back in the day, like, you know, old Brooklyn in like the 30s and the 40s, and stealing potatoes and like, you know, lighting fires on the street, you know, all that kind of stuff.
I know, it's so funny when like you hear those things and it's like, obviously you see them portrayed in movies and like we have a sense of it, but it's like, that's so fucking insane. Like it's insane.
I know, really is.
Because it's like I look at the type of lives that, you know, most of us live, and it's just like it scares me to one point, because it's like, I mean, I'm speaking for me personally, it's like, you know, I don't know, I'm not a crafty or a handy guy. Like I don't know how to fix shit. Like that's just me.
Yeah.
And so
right.
I worry, where I'm just like, oh man, like is our whole culture missing something now? Because like, yeah, I know how to do shit with computers, but like where does that leave me?
I know, it's true. I mean, it's a different world. I mean, my grandfather's an interesting case, because I mean, he grew up in Brooklyn,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, all the kind of stuff that you would imagine, all the kick the can, all the kind of, you know, like stealing food kind of stuff that you would imagine that kids in the 30s and the 40s would do. But he put himself through college, and he became an engineer and worked on he worked with like Bell Laboratories and all those companies. 9X and whoever, you know, I think that all those companies kind of eventually turned into Verizon, but
Mm-hmm.
he worked on the development, I think, of Unix.
Oh shit.
Yeah, so that was like all that stuff that they started doing then when he worked there. And he worked on like the development of that like way back when, like maybe in the 60s or so.
Wow. Yeah, where computers were, you know, the size of like 7 rooms.
Right, exactly. He would like write code and stuff by hand, you know?
That's amazing.
Isn't that crazy?
I know. It's just awesome to think of that, and to be able to be like, all right, well, obviously one day, like, you know, our kids are going to look back and be like, dude, like so fucking outdated what they were doing. It's crazy.
Yeah, I know.
And so you're, you have brothers and sisters, right?
Yeah, I have two younger brothers.
Okay, yeah, and I know that. I mean, you've been very open about, you know, your brother having Down syndrome, and like obviously that he's younger than you.
Yeah, he's about like probably like 16 months younger than me. You know,
okay.
like I was born in the beginning of '83. He was born at the end of '84.
Oh, got it.
Yeah,
and so that, like, I mean, obviously, like you were, you know, you were experiencing a different childhood in regards to the way that you were watching your brother grow up. Like, when did that sort of manifest itself? I'm just so interested in it, because it's such a, obviously it's such a tough disease, but when a person is able to kind of come out the other side of it, like your brother, from what I understand, has,
yeah.
It's like, yeah, when did it manifest itself and you started to notice that, like, maybe this isn't normal or whatever?
Oh man, I'll tell you, man, right away, because when he was born, he had a lot of heart issues.
Mm-hmm.
So he had open heart surgery like within the first year he was alive. It was a specific type that I don't think had been successfully completed many times, if at all, up until that point. So it was like really experimental too.
Wow.
But you know, he pulled through, and we always had like a really close bond. You know, because my grandparents would bring me to the hospital and my parents would be there, you know, and I would stand there while he was just like white, you know, like no color, no nothing. So it was definitely, it was tough. But once he pulled through, then it was just, you know, I didn't know any better. I was only, you know, barely 2 years older than him. So I just grew up getting used to that. And then it wasn't until maybe, I guess, late elementary years, like middle school years, when I realized it wasn't kind of the same as everybody else, you know?
Yeah. The like obviously whatever the context you're raised in, like that's normal until someone else tells you it's not normal.
Right. And I mean, like when you see your friends like hanging out after school or going to do this and going to do that, like my parents had to work, both of them full time, because, you know, the hospital bills were crazy. It wasn't an easy thing. So I'd be home, you know, at like 10 years old, 11 years old, you know, going straight home to make sure that I was with him in case anything happened. Because, you know, he wasn't able to articulate exactly, you know, if he was feeling sick or if it was this or that or whatever. So I had to kind of be there and wait it out. So there's a lot of things that, you know, I didn't really kind of experience. And I would see that as you kind of got into those awkward teen years, you know, when everyone's hanging out and doing this and smoking cigarettes and getting all that stuff, you know. So I kind of missed out on that.
Yeah. Well, it's that, I mean, obviously it's awesome that you were able to, be there for him. Your parents had to, what were they doing for work, your parents?
Well, my father was a truck driver for Stella D'Oro Cookies out of the Bronx, and he worked construction on the side.
Okay.
So he was working two jobs, which eventually he ended up just starting his own contracting business after that.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom, she did a bunch of stuff. She did whatever she could to help out. She had a few office jobs, things like that. She would babysit.
Sure.
Just, that kind of stuff to just make sure that there was, enough to kind of take care of all the stuff that we needed.
Yeah, no, for sure. She was hustling.
Oh yeah, big time. I mean, my whole family is like super hustlers, like that's just, I mean, that's how I was raised. I mean, really, really hardworking, really, dedicated to family and to, making sure that everything was okay. So it was good. It was good to grow up around.
You were obviously given a sense of responsibility before you knew what that word even meant.
Yeah, definitely. Without a doubt.
And so yeah, as you started to grow up and start to enter, like, obviously high school is kind of the jumping off point where people start to be able to make their own choices or whatever. So how, what sort of kid would you define yourself as? Art was always an important part of your life. So did you find yourself like the dude in the corner drawing pictures, or or were you playing sports? Like, where did you find yourself?
No, it's funny, I was a serious jock little kid. I played all the sports. I was really into baseball. I was pretty good too. I was really, really into it.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I started hitting those like kind of early teen years, like getting it like 10, 11, 12, I started kind of realizing how things were. And I just developed like a massive sense of nervousness and anxiety. And it kind of pulled me out of the whole sports world because I would just start, I would freak out about all sorts of things. It's like, oh my God, what if this happens? What if that happens? Because all of a sudden I'm old enough to like realize, what happened when I was younger. So all those things started to manifest, I guess. And then
wait, so like your anxiety from playing sports was derived from like you were anxious about like losing games, or like was it just
no it was more or less the anxiety started to come about like honestly I don't even know the root of it, but it definitely had to do with the fact that how sick my brother was when he was a kid, and then I started to like understand the concept of hospitals and
so like getting injured or whatever.
Yeah. So then I was like, well, what happens if I get sick on the field, or something happens and I got to go to the hospital, or, something where it's like you're supposed to just be enjoying yourself and something bad could happen at any moment. For some reason, I just like started focusing on those kinds of things, and my anxiety levels were just like outrageous.
Right. How did you, so like, how did it manifest itself? Like, did you kind of just like, run off the field or whatever? Or like, oh, I can't go up to bat right now.
Well, I stuck it out. I played like my last season, whatever. And then it was really starting to get bad. And then I tried the year after. And I think it was like the first or second practice, I had gotten moved up to the age level after me, because I was pretty good when I was a kid. So they moved me up, and then I started, all the pressure and everything. I started getting really anxious about it. So within the first couple of practices, I didn't know how to deal with it, so I stopped then. And it was kind of like trying to figure out what to do with myself, because that was, I had drawn all my life, but that wasn't really what I identified myself with when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
I was more like, I was like shortstop. That's what I was when I was a kid. So
yeah, obviously you can see exactly where it comes from. It's like you had to be responsible at an early age, so therefore you were completely cognizant of like, dude, like I could get like hit in the head with a baseball or something, like, and I wouldn't be able to, not only would I be screwed, but my brother would be screwed, my family would be screwed. Like,
yeah, exactly. I mean, there's all sorts of little things. I mean, I saw kids get hit in the head. I got hit in the mouth a bunch of times, like all sorts of stupid that. I mean,
yeah, someone
like hit me in the head with a bat once. It wasn't like a hard hit, but it was hard enough to be like, oh man, if that was harder, I could have been in serious trouble.
Yeah.
So like there's, all sorts of weird stuff that happens. I've seen, like you see like kids slide and they break their leg or something, because it happens.
Totally. But yeah, because you weren't afforded the fact that you couldn't, or you had to care about that. You couldn't just be like a kid, but whatever, dude.
Yeah, exactly. Because it was like 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 when you're a kid and you're just like jumping off trees and climbing shit, you think like whatever happens, I'll be fine.
Yeah.
But I had witnessed what happens if you're not fine, and it was scary.
Yeah, no, well, that's I can completely attach those two things and completely understand where you're coming from. So then, as you started to transition into high school,
well, it was even before that. When I was in middle school is when I started to kind of get a little bit more introverted because I was always very outgoing.
Mm-hmm.
So I started trying to figure out new things to get interested in and new ways to kind of deal with it because I started getting like social anxiety from it and all sorts of annoying stuff. So then I kind of went back to art and started drawing more and getting more into music. And then that's when I started kind of learning more about hardcore and metal and stuff like that from, friends and friends' older brothers who were in bands.
Uh-huh.
And by the time high school rolled around, I was already pretty deep into like just hardcore in general.
Right.
Playing in bands and going to shows all over the place. And then, and then once I started getting into that, then it was like, it was the same thing as playing a game, because then you're in front of a bunch of people, you're in the spotlight. So then I started getting those feelings again, but except this time I kind of figured out how to deal with them a little bit and how to kind of cope with them. So it kind of came back around. And then that's when I kind of started going back to my normal self, except now I had more art, I had music, and I had all these, new and different friends and all these different experiences that came from it.
Interesting. Yeah. So basically through music, you were able to obviously not only find, a sense of identity, but it was able to kind of push you past the anxiety you were experiencing.
Yeah. I mean, especially when you get up there when you're a kid. I mean, I started playing hardcore shows when I was maybe 14 or 15. I'd get my parents would drive me in a station wagon with my drums and my friends, and we'd set up, and everyone else there would be like 18 or in their 20s, or some of them even in their 30s,
right?
And then we'd have to get up on stage, and there'd be, 50, 100 kids sitting there waiting for us to play, and you couldn't mess up,
Right. It's so funny, the whole, like, I started playing bands when I was like 16, 17, but yeah. I think, honestly, it's something I think that's so inherent to New York in general, where it's like, obviously you go back to, late 80s hardcore, and it's like, you hear about, Sammy from Youth of Today, like he was like 14, when he started playing Youth of Today.
Yeah, exactly.
That really doesn't exist in many other parts of the country. It's like usually you have to wait until, like 15, 16, like to have that level of independence. But just because like maybe it's just a level of trust in New York where they're just like, oh yeah, like I can drop my kids off. I know it'll be okay. Like,
God, I don't even know, man. I think it's just, I don't even know if it's trust. I think it's just like, my dad would always talk about like the difference between like book smarts and street smarts and stuff like that, and I was always very aware of, if you're out on the street, you watch the people who are walking around you. You don't do anything stupid. You don't talk to people who you shouldn't be talking to, all that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that learning that really helped, my parents trust me more when I was younger to, they would drop me off, in like all these random spots in the city or in Queens or wherever, and just like be like, all right, let us know when you're done, and, we'll come and get you. And, who knows? I mean, this is, like the first show I ever played was this place in Bayside, Queens, called Voodoo Lounge, and that place got shut down because someone got stabbed in the head.
That's it. And again, that's so typical New York. You're like, oh yeah, that happens.
I mean, that's it could have happened anywhere. It could have happened at any time, but that's the type of place you were in. Sometimes bad stuff happens.
So what pulled you toward drums, and like was music a part of your life? Like, did your parents introduce you to it and kind of grow up with a love with it? Or was it only because, your friends and, older brothers' friends were kind of into that stuff that sort of introed you into independent music?
Well, it's pretty cool. I mean, I definitely grew up with a creative family, and when I was younger, my parents always really they always really loved music. They always had music on. I was always really into it. They bought me like a little drum set and a little guitar, and I would always kind of play around. And my mom's brother was a drummer actually in a Rush cover band.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
Yeah, he was a really good drummer. So he started teaching me how to play the drums when I was about 9 or 10. So I started learning when I was real young, and I got really into it because it was just one of those things where you could create something that just sounded really cool. You could let aggression out, and everything was like all okay,
Mm-hmm.
So I got into it. I got into it real serious because I started listening to Rush. I started getting into like really technical drumming, and then through that I kind of discovered more of like the heavier stuff, and anything that had really fast drums or lots of double bass or anything like that. I just gravitated towards immediately because it was, really high energy and really intense and really difficult to master. And I got real into it.
Yeah, it's funny because I definitely see, kids, especially when they're intro to like music, like they either go one of two ways, where it's like one, they're drawn to like the technical aspect of it because that's just impressive, or it's like either they're just like the message and the simplicity behind like, whatever punk or whatever style of music you get into. It's awesome that you were like progressive metal. That sounds like the way I need to go.
Oh, totally.
That's awesome. And so what band was that with? Because usually the first bands that you play in, they have to have a terrible name.
Oh, the very first band I ever played in with my friend Mike. He was this kid Mike was my lifelong friend. We met when we were 3 years old in nursery school, and we've been friends ever since. And we played in every band together.
Amazing.
Yeah, the very first band was pretty much like a weird, like Nirvana meets, bad Metallica meets really basic hardcore ripoff band, and it was called Euphoria at the time. We were maybe like 10 or 11.
Holy shit!
And the first real band we played in was called Fight to Survive, and that was a hardcore band that we started probably around, I'm gonna say maybe 14 or 15 years old.
Okay. That name is like, that's not, obviously it's not the best name ever, but that's not terrible. Like, that
it wasn't that bad. I mean, we spent a lot of time trying to come up with names. We were all like, because like what hardcore band names were all back in the day. Like it was always just like army inspired or anti-police inspired or anything that's just
right.
Like that anarchy kind of basic nonsense.
Your first like band where you're actually gonna like play a show, it's like it's so torturous to find that name. You're just like, God, what are we gonna do?
Awful. It really was. And well, what the thing was too is back then a lot of bands had the way that you would talk about bands was with their initials. Like we were huge fans of VOD, and we were like, we want to be like VOD because they get to use the initials. It's like Vision Disorder, VOD. We want a band where we can just say the initials of it.
That's perfect. I like that.
So we're like, it's got to be at least 3 words, so we can be like FTS, and everyone hears FTS and they know it's Fight to Survive.
I love that. That's awesome. You're like, you just took that direct inspiration and like, this is what we're doing.
Oh yeah, I mean that's how it comes down to. It's like it's like what's the nickname? Like what is the logo going to look like? What's it going to look like on a T-shirt? Like how are you going to like draw it on a wall or like carve it into a desk?
Yeah.
That's what we were thinking of,
Is that when you started to kind of, like, did you do art for the band and stuff like that?
So much. Yeah, it was great. It was the perfect outlet for it. And at that time I started teaching myself Photoshop. I started learning more and more about design. I started kind of going out there and seeking, just design in general so I could learn more about it. And around that time is when I actually started freelancing, and doing my first professional work. Like I was doing a lot of, logos and demo covers and flyers and T-shirt designs for all the bands. And then I was doing, really, really terrible websites for local businesses. And I was like 14 years old.
That's amazing. So you were doing websites on like Angel Fire and stuff like that?
Oh, yeah.
That's amazing. So like what bands were you kind of cutting your teeth with as far as like, that were, I mean, obviously like you mentioned Vision of Disorder. What else is like, what shows were you going to around that time? And like, what was the, other sort of inspirations as you were growing within that scene?
Well, the thing that was tough about me was that I was into that progressive kind of stuff from learning, Rush drumming from my uncle.
Right.
And I was really into the heavier metal side of stuff. Mm-hmm. So I was never into the old school stuff. I was always into the more new school hardcore. So
sure.
Luckily, like Long Island and Queens had a lot of that. Mm-hmm. So I was into, like VOD, Sky Came Falling, Incision, Irate, Sworn Enemy, man, like all the really like the tougher stuff, the kind of crazy sounding stuff.
Sure. Or like stuff once stuff started to transition, once like metalcore started to become a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So and there was all those bands that were like pre-metalcore.
Yeah.
That had like that metal influence, but were still hardcore bands, and in between songs would still preach about unity and all that garbage.
Yeah. Obviously, in seeing how you've progressed with your, your art and your career from that perspective, I mean, obviously, that designers come from, all walks of life, but like nothing is more, like you said, that nothing is more fertile and easy to kind of like understand how to like create art than like a music scene. And my mind always gets blown when someone like, is a great designer and they've got no connection to any of that, like any music at all or any scene or any community. It's just like, oh yeah, I like to create art. And it's like,
right.
Where'd you come from? Like, it's crazy.
Right. Exactly.
And so, were you a good student in high school, or was it one of those things you just kind of like went just to go?
No. I was like in all honors classes. I had like all A pluses and all that,
Nice. And did you do that kind of for your parents, or was it for yourself? Like you were really wanted to kind of better yourself from that perspective?
I never studied or anything, man. It was just one of those things that came natural.
Yeah, all those kids look at you and you're just like, that fucking John always gets A's on tests.
Well, I was like the only kid in like the honors classes that had really big T-shirts and ripped jeans and stuff that said like, brutal, uncompromising hardcore, kind of stuff. All the other kids were kind of a little bit more on the, I guess, the more clean cut side, or there was that little crew that we had going on, and luckily, like in my high school too, there was a lot of older kids that were in really good hardcore bands too. So it was kind of cool. Like, I mean, it didn't even matter like what classes you were in or what you were doing, because you had those like older kids to kind of look up to. And high school was just like a place to be, until you went out and played shows or practiced or talked about what bands were what.
Right. How did your parents begin to react to, I mean, obviously, like you said, they were dropping you off to shows and stuff like that, but did they, were they worried about you? Where they were like, dude, John is getting in with a fucking weird crew of people?
I don't think so, because a lot of the guys that used to play with us, even the older guys, were really, really nice guys. I mean, like you got into, especially like I really liked the tough guy hardcore, like, and there was always fights, but it wasn't fights with each other. It was fights with like outsiders,
right.
So, I mean, even sometimes like my mom would drop me off sometimes, and she made friends with like one of the doormen that was always at this place, Castle Heights, that we used to play in. And like some of the older guys would talk to my parents and be like, oh, blah, blah, blah. Like I think my parents knew that, at that point I was at least smart enough to not surround myself with problems,
mm-hmm.
And the guys that we did look up to at the time, I mean, they were our favorite bands, but they were also really good dudes, and we were the kids. So they kind of looked out for us. And if there was anything, any problems, they were always there to kind of help out, which was great. So we didn't really have like that, like kind of old, like back in the day, hardcore, like punk, gutter, trashy, everyone's kind of like mean to each other kind of vibe. It was pretty good.
Yeah, that's cool. And obviously it made your parents trust what you were involved in and just be like, oh no, like he's taken care of, he'll be okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's as much as they could anyway. I'm still like in a bar in the middle of Jackson Heights. Like
right.
Don't push it too far.
There's kids within the scene that obviously, they go the sort of, straight edge, not partying route. And then there's obviously kids that go the rowdier route. And I always picture, even though New York City has always had like a vibrant straight edge scene, it always seems like there is a more, like let's party contingent. Like, were you surrounded by that, or were you interested in that, or did that something that you just kind of like turned away from?
I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't do drugs. I never have. And I was never into that whole thing. And there was definitely some straight edge kids and stuff around, but a lot of the guys that I hang out with it was basic. It was just kind of like drinking beers kind of thing, like nothing too crazy, just your typical kind of teenage, or early 20s kind of mentality. Nothing, no like heavy duty partying.
No one was pulling out white powder and is like, whoa, what's this?
No. I mean, it was just beers. It was nothing crazy. I mean, you never even saw anyone really pull out like weed or anything ever. It was just like a bunch of guys getting drunk and playing sloppy hardcore.
Right. A good old time.
I mean, but there were like the vegan straight edge kids, like the Earth Crisis,
of course,
style kids. Some of those kids were okay. The other ones maybe took it a little too far, but everyone kind of understood their place, I think, within that community.
Yeah.
And, everyone kind of let everyone else be.
That's good. Yeah. It's definitely, you need strength and diversity, And so as you started to kind of, transition out of high school and like, did you want to be like, all right, I want to be I want to be in a band. I want to tour in a band. Like that's my thing. Or was it, did you have other aspirations from that perspective?
Well, I mean, as soon as I really started understanding what design was is when I really started wanting a career in it. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to just do music packaging. Like I wanted that to be my life. But I knew that being in a band would also help me get to that point. So if I could work hard in a band and get to a point where more people knew me and I made more friends and, we toured a little bit and got to meet people, then I would be able to get more work out of it too. I was kind of more interested in it for that aspect. Mm-hmm. The band Fight to Survive we broke up at the end of high school because half the band went away to school and the other half stayed home.
Right.
So my friend Mike and I started a new band that was called The Ambition, and we played. It was very metalcore, like Prayer for Cleansing kind of influence, like Prayer for Cleansing, Poison the Well, early 2000s kind of metal infused hardcore. Mm-hmm. So we did that, and we ended up playing a lot, and we got to a decent point. Like we were signed to a small label that ended up, like some of the bands that were on there were like Black Dahlia Murder was on it.
What label was it?
It was called Love Lost Records.
Oh, yeah. No, I remember that label. Yeah.
We were on that label for a little while, and we tried to set up a tour with one of the bands out of North Carolina called Quell. Mm-hmm. And we were really friendly with them. They were really nice dudes, really kind of like chaotic.
Dude, Quell ended up putting out, because my old band was on a label called Goodfellow Records, and Goodfellow put out...
Yeah. That label was awesome, by the way.
Dude, good. Yeah, I played in a band called Taken, and we put out like EP and a full length on Goodfellow. Actually, no, 2 EPs and a full length. So
wow, I didn't know you were in Taken, because I remember back in like early 2000s, Taken in our neck of the woods was like everyone was like, "Oh, have you heard this band? Have you heard this band?"
We definitely played good shows up in your area. I definitely remember.
Taken had such a buzz going for it. At the time, I was like, who is this band?
Yeah. Well, and it was funny because, like, obviously that was kind of the advent of, like, the internet existed, but it wasn't, like, as pervasive as it is now. So it's like the bands that were on opposite coasts, you had to kind of wait to get into. Like,
yeah. Oh, totally. I mean, the closest thing we had was MP3.com.
Oh, yeah. Oh, dude, which was, like, fucking huge. Like, that was, like, a godsend when that came along.
When MP3.com came around is when I think I heard Seven Angels, Seven Plagues for the first time.
Yeah.
In this day, I always call Evergreen Terrace the MP3.com band, because I feel like they got all of their hype from MP3.com.
Dude, for sure. It's just as much as bands like, years later can be called a MySpace band. Like they're totally an MP3.com band. That's perfect. We played a few shows up in that area. Like we played the Backstreet Blues, I think.
Oh, yeah, totally. We got bands from Backstreet Blues.
Oh, what did you do?
Because we were like, we were like the tough guys or whatever. So all of our friends that came, and by that point is when you started seeing like that crossover of like emo kids and new metal kids and hardcore kids and metalcore kids, like all kind of going to the same shows. Mm-hmm. And it just started getting really bad at that time. And all of our friends were like Queens and Long Island kids. And if anyone did anything out of line, it would immediately turn into a fight.
Right.
So we would just play shows and go around, and we got banned from playing there because our crowd that we brought was just like too rowdy.
Right.
And they just wanted nothing to do with it.
Yeah, no, that was such a weird club too. They had mirrors on either the ceiling or the walls. I just remember it being a really weird venue.
Yeah, it was in a basement. It was like an old like jazz club kind of thing.
That's it.
Train station.
Because I think every person that gets into design, because usually you've got one dude in the band that is into that, because obviously it makes it cheap for the band. They don't need to hire somebody to do their t-shirt designs or whatever.
Exactly, yeah.
But I think it's awesome that you had the foresight to be like, all right, my band is going to get me work, and vice versa. Like, right. I just like that sort of planning where it's like, yeah, this is what's going to work out.
Yeah, it was just like one of those things, man. Like at a certain point, like toward the very beginning of college or the end of high school, I was introduced to Asterix Studios.
Oh yeah,
and I was in love with their website. It was like a godsend. You know, it's like everything they had was just incredible music packaging, and I was just so obsessed. And that's like when they split off when they split off to make Invisible Creature, I was like, these guys, they don't even have to do any work. They're already like legends. Like they can just put up a website and I'll still say that they're the best studio around.
Yeah. Obviously, especially with independent music, design was important, but you didn't really recognize consistency in people. Like, you just, here's a layout. That's cool. But
right, exactly.
They definitely, the Clark brothers were definitely the first that I recall as well, where it was like you actually paid attention. Well, I think between them and obviously Jake Bannon from Converge.
Right, exactly.
Those were the first dudes where you were just like, oh, wow, like they do, like their artwork is consistent and consistently good. And
well, like Jacob Bannon, I mean, I almost feel like he defined a style. You know, that whole like the Opposite of December cover where it was like this collage style and this these different kinds of colors and these different fonts and everything. Like it almost kind of it kind of came out of nowhere. I mean, between Jake Bannon, the Clark brothers, and like Derek Hess.
No, that's true. Derek Hess.
So, I was sold, man. I was like, this is what I need to be doing.
Yeah, and that's awesome that you're able to attach yourself to something and be like, I see where they're at. I want to achieve that in some small fashion.
Right, exactly.
You didn't go to college, or you were just kind of trying to do the band and freelance stuff?
Yeah, no, I did. I went to college and I worked and I did the band and I freelanced. So I was like, I mean, that's how I've always been. I just do a million things at once. I need to be active 24 hours a day. But when I went to college, I went to a local school. Like I didn't want to leave home because I liked where I was. And that's kind of like a curse of like a lot of Long Island kids, is that they never leave. So I didn't really want to leave at the time, even though there was like cool stuff out there for me to do. I was kind of a homebody. I had all my places, all my spots, I knew everybody and I was comfortable. So I went to a local college, and I made really good friends with all the art department. I majored in graphic design and stuff, but I had been doing it for so long that my teachers kind of let me kind of do my own thing. I would freelance and get graded on it instead of doing the school projects, because I was already past a lot of that stuff. So it was kind of a cool experience. I got to talk to my teachers more about business and production as opposed to learning the basics. So it was great because they would kind of treat me more like I was past that stage of foundation learning. I got such a different education than most of the other kids that were there because I had already known, like what going into pre-production was like. I had already known what billing was like, and I had already known what like dealing with clients was like. So I was able to talk to them more about that kind of stuff. That's
amazing. Hearing what you did and what you went through, like it just gets me so stoked because like I know that you do speaking engagements to kids and stuff like that. And I think like the most valuable lesson that can be passed on to kids in high school or even, in junior high is like, you don't need to wait for your quote unquote life to begin. Like you can do shit now. Like get into it now. There's nothing holding you back.
Exactly. I totally agree. I mean, I just couldn't wait. I wanted to do it, and I wanted to do it when I wanted to do it. So I just started. Mm-hmm. And the great thing about the computer was that there was more instant gratification with that, Yeah. Like so you could type out a font, you could make a shape and fill the color. You didn't have to sit there and paint the color in. You didn't have to sit there and, that's kind of where, once I learned about that, I really started to appreciate what could be done with it, because one of the things that I always hated about art when I was a kid was how long a lot of it took. Like I had a vision, I wanted the vision to happen, but then after, halfway through, a couple hours deep, I just got sick of it. I was like, I'm sick of coloring in these shapes. I'm sick of doing this, doing that. And, I'm sick of sharpening the colored pencils and going to
right.
I just got tired of it. And then when I learned about how easy the computer could make it in terms of, time, I was all over it.
Yeah. That's so awesome. You're like, yo, I don't have the fucking patience for this. I need to get this spilled out on paper immediately. Obviously, I mean, as you well know, since you freelance for so long, like freelancing sucks. Like,
yeah, totally.
As your main source of, I mean, there's nothing wrong, like you were saying, with like, you're a hustler and you've no problem doing that, but it's like comes into the consideration where it's just like, all right, like once you have a relationship and like,
right.
how long have you been married?
About 3.5 years now.
Okay, yeah. And like once that obviously starts to enter the picture of like, oh man, like I'm responsible for someone besides like the food that's on my plate.
Yeah, that's true.
How did you kind of wrestle in your own mind the past where it's like, or the path of, all right, I maybe should try to get a, whatever, full-time design gig? Because I know you had one for a while. versus like, all right, like I really need to build something on my own.
When I graduated college, you know, they have like the senior show and all that shit, and I had done a few projects that I got paid for. You know, I did some great album work. I did some poster work, and I hung them up. And there was a local studio that came by, and they said, you know, we want you to work on some T-shirt designs for us. Come by the studio, whatever. I was like, okay, cool. So I put on my suit and I bring my portfolio and I walk in there thinking, you know, I don't know what a design studio is like. So I walk in there thinking it's like a business meeting. And it's just a couple of guys in like shorts and a T-shirt in a room, and they're doing websites and doing all this stuff. And their work was actually pretty terrible. And I remember looking at them and saying, you know, my work is a million times better than this. How come I'm not doing this? I could have their work. I could be making more money than them. I walked out of there and decided that I was going to freelance right away.
Right.
I graduated college and went straight into freelancing. And then it turns out that I did not have the discipline. I didn't have the resources. I couldn't do it. After a couple of months, I threw in the towel and I went and I worked someplace else. Then I got a call from my friend Matt. We started CXXVI together. But he called me. He said, "Hey, the place I'm working at is hiring. You should come in and take this job." So I was like, okay. So I went in there and I interviewed and I took the job. And the way that environment was set up, it was like there was a bunch of young guys, and the majority of the business was a print brokering business, but we also did design on the side. And the way it worked was that since we were doing print brokering and design, all the design had to be done faster than you could imagine. Like it had to be good and it had to be fast. So I thought I was fast before then, but I had to learn speed and, you know, discipline and just kind of like how to get ideas out of my head as quickly as possible. And Matt and I to this day still call that place Design Boot Camp.
That's awesome.
It trained us to get shit done fast and well. So after that, I was, you know, I had learned a lot about business. You know, I become really friendly with the owner, and we had a lot of talks about it. And you know, I went out and I started my own studio. And then soon after, Matt came in and he worked with me. We did the studio for a while, and then we started the clothing company for a while. And the clothing company afforded me the chance to kind of do the work that I wanted to do. And then once I started getting some recognition for the designs that I was doing for CXXVI, I started getting more freelance jobs, and I started getting, you know, attention from the type of clients I had always wanted attention from. My wife and I had just gotten married at that point, and we were broke. Like, I mean, as broke as you could be. And I asked her, I was like, can I take a couple $1,000s out of our wedding present, you know, fund, and buy a new computer and try this freelancing thing again full time? And I was really nervous because that was like a big thing to ask of her. She was like, yeah, go for it. And I was like, I promise I'll pay it back. She's like, just do what you have to do. So she was really supportive of it, which was great. And I went out, I bought an iMac, and I sat down and I started messing around. And it's ever since then I've been going at it full time. And now the clothing company is licensed, and it's, you know, it's not a headache for me anymore. I design and I creative direct, but, you know, I don't have to worry about production, sales, and all that. And I just freelance full time now.
Yeah.
And it's so much better now that I've been through all the different types of hells that you could, you know, think of as a design professional. Because now I know what to avoid, and I know what kind of attitude it takes to get work done, and, you know, how to make X amount of dollars to survive, how to make this amount to save, and, you know, how to keep clients and how to keep the portfolio growing.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, you all you did was just basically piece together all of the bits that you learned over the years and be like, all right, like, I know how to not fuck up so badly anymore.
Right, exactly.
I mean, the idea of a clothing company, like, to say there's a lot of competition out there is like an understatement. Everybody has a fucking clothing company. Like, and not illegitimizing the work that you do. Plus, the definition of a clothing company is definitely very small, because a person can open up, you know, a big cartel page and have 3 shirts and they have a clothing company.
Well, totally. I totally agree with you, because if that wasn't the case, then I wouldn't have ever opened a clothing company.
Right.
You know, it's just, if this asshole can do it, why can't I?
I love your attitude for everything, where it's just like, dude, look at this fucking jerk over here. I could do better than him.
Yeah, one of those things I battle. You know, like when you're younger, you think you're invincible and you think you're so great at everything, and then you know you get a dose of reality and you come back to earth, and it's just one of those things that's like a constant roller coaster. It's like, well, at this point in my life, I'm so much better than this guy. I should be better than him. And then you know you get to a certain point, and then you are better than that person, then someone else comes along and knocks you right back down, and you go, oh wow, I'm not that good. I really need to keep working. You know.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's like that. It's good that obviously the barrier to entry is low in regards to that, but you know, you want to make sure that the stuff you're putting out there isn't just like super regurgitated, which that's what I think is cool about the design aesthetic that you put forward, where it's interesting because it's like it can be applied to anything. Like, you know, you obviously have worked for, you know, very large corporate clients. And then obviously all the way down to, you know, like doing a show poster for Thrice, you know. It's just cool that you're able to kind of apply that aesthetic and still like retain who you are, because like that's always the balance of like art and commerce, where it's like
right.
And like, you know, right. Have you been, like, let me put it this way, have you been approached by like, you know, certain companies where they've wanted you to do a certain thing and it's kind of like, oh, this makes me feel uncomfortable, but I'll still do it because I can get my voice across? Or is that a thought process that you're going through?
There's a few things that, you know, you, especially working with bigger corporate jobs, there's a few things that'll come across and you'll have to think about whether or not you want to follow through with it. You know, there's the one where someone will ask you to do something that's not necessarily your voice. There's the one where someone will kind of do something for something you necessarily don't agree with. Where do I want to draw the line? Mm-hmm. You know, like I've had, like I don't drink, you know, but like half of my clients are all alcohol related. That kind of thing. It's just like, well, I have the ability to do something cool. I'm not doing anything that directly harms anyone. It's people can make their own decisions, and that's kind of the way I look at that kind of stuff. And then there's the clients that say, you know, we want you to do a design for this, you know, but we want you to do it in this style. Do I look at this as a challenge to do something different, or is this something that's just not me and I'm just going to lose my voice in, and they might as well just, you know, hire anyone else to do it? Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like you're going to have to weigh your options and think about, once the project is finished, how you're going to look and how you're going to be perceived. Is it done? Am I going to be proud of it? And, you know, are people going to come to my website and look at it and be like, wow, this was great, or oh my God, I can't only imagine how much he got paid to do something this much not in his style. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I try to be as true to myself as possible, especially since, you know, when I started the design studio years ago, I really tried to do everything. You know, I tried to make everybody happy. I tried to do any style that anyone wanted. And it turns out, I mean, no one wants someone who can do everything in that sense. You know, people come to you because you do one thing and do one thing well. And that's kind of the attitude I've had over the past few years, because I've seen the stuff that I've done where I've tried to, you know, please everyone. And the stuff that I've done to try and please everyone might be great, but the only person who's not pleased in that is me. And then what's the point of me even doing this? Yeah. You know, I got into this because it's something I love and something I enjoy. So I look at it as a way where if I can put my voice into it, if I can put, you know, my heart into everything and my ideas and my experiences in life, that's even better than anything I could imagine. I really don't care, you know, what the payment is for that. It's something that